Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is my Jane Austen mug, and it has a sleepy time with sinus soother, which is not the best of the flavored sleepy time. I mean, they're all kind of flavored, but you know what I mean. Like it has a kind of bit of licorice in it, which is supposed to be good for you, good for the sinuses. Better be good for the sinuses because I really do prefer the regular sleepy time. But needs must. My sinuses have been a little bit sinusy, and yeah, my Jane Austen mug because let's face it, she's still my favorite writer of the Regency. I don't think anything's going to change in that respect. But I thought I'd do kind of an update slash wrap up because the books I talk about here I probably won't cover again in a wrap up. We'll see. Trying to even things out a little bit, not overdo things or whatever. And so I'm going to start with the two books that I finished. And I'm going to talk about actually 4 books that I finished, but for 2 different challenges, different read-a-thons, read-alongs, read books. And then I'm going to tell you about 2 books that I'm still reading. So it's a little bit more than my usual wrap-up, I guess. So I finished 2 books related to Freddy Regency. And that's, I guess, not as much as I thought I was going to do at this point. I thought I was going to read a lot more. But you know what? I am kind of pacing myself in February. It's been a very busy month. Not making excuses, but it just has been. But I did manage to finish 2 books, and the first one I'm going to talk about is a novel. Again, reinforcing the fact that Jane Austen is my favorite novelist of the Regency period. Walter Scott is pretty good too. A lot of people are reading Ivanhoe this month on BookTube, and I read Ivanhoe many years ago and really enjoyed it. I was thinking about rereading it actually this month, but I just didn't have the space for it because I have another book of his that I haven't read yet as well. So maybe someday. But I still have a bit of difficulty finding another novelist of this period and thereabouts that I really feel great about. That I mean, I started a couple of years ago. I read Frances Burney's Evelina. Did not hate it. Did not love it. I have a couple other novels of hers. I'm still not very amused. Just okay. But although her account of a surgery that she had in that time period was amazing writing. Horrible, but amazing writing. But I've been hearing about Maria Edgeworth for so long, and I wanted to try a book of hers, and I picked one of the shortest ones. And I'm thinking I should have started with, I think it's Belinda. Is that the one that she's known for? There's also The Absentee, which I do have a copy of. I probably should have started with one of those books, but I decided to do Castle Rackrent because it's really short, and I thought short and sweet, and I realized I have a Penguin book that has Castle Rackrent and I think Ennui or something, another book of something like that, another book of Maria Edgeworth, a short one as well. But, so I thought, okay, good, because I had bought this a while back and it has a lot of writing in it, not mine, and not really necessarily good writing. A couple exclamation points were well placed, actually, during some bits where I really agreed with the exclamation points. But I probably will get rid of this particular volume. I don't dislike it per se, this book, I gave it 3 stars, and again, I will one day do that reviewer ratings tag, but I'm not great at why I give numbers to things. Usually on Goodreads, because I'm really speaking of the Goodreads rating system, I don't give below a 3, because if it's going to be below a 3, unless it's something I really want to warn people off with a bad review, which I'm not one to do too often anyway, usually the books that I complete that I'm not that crazy about will be a 3-star, and this was a 3-star. The writing itself was not terrible, actually. I could see that. That's why I don't want to give up on her. But the story was just, it was about a Castle Rackrent, a family of people. Did they say their names here? Because now I forgot it altogether. But anyway, they had another last name. You know, in these places they have like they take on the title and they also have another name. And it's blanked out because I finished this a couple weeks ago. But the narrator, I guess, is Thaddy, or is it, I don't know. I think it's short for Thaddeus, so I think it's Thaddy Quirk. And he's kind of like the faithful retainer who's been around forever. He's like in his 90s, I think. And he's just telling this whole story about this family. And each one that comes in and inherits the title and the castle record and lives there for a while, sometimes gets married, goes through all kinds of financial ups and downs, mostly downs, and then finally dies, and the next person comes. And it's a little, I don't know how to put this. It wasn't that great of a story. It was just, and I'm saying that in my opinion. I don't know, other people might think differently, but it was just, it's in Ireland. I don't know if that's supposed to make a difference, if it was supposed to be saying something in those time periods. I don't know that much about the aristocracy in Ireland in this particular time period. I might want to read more about that, because I love my history. It was just, every character was just not likable. There was no one endearing. Everybody was just horrible, wasteful, and even the one that was supposed to be the good one wasn't so good, and just keep going to ruin one really horrible person who married somebody and locked them up in a room because they wouldn't give them their, I think, diamonds or something. It was just this whole, pretty anti-Semite moment there, that I didn't see coming. And I don't know if it's really, because I didn't read the introduction, and maybe I should have, or in the notes. I don't know. I think it might be based on, maybe not on truth, but maybe just a little bit of experience went into writing this book, that Mariah Edgeworth knew about. So maybe I need to do a little more reading up on her and her life and her family as well, so I can understand the background. But it just wasn't quite enjoyable. It was short enough that I was able to persevere and finish it, but it wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to get back to Castle Rackrent. It was just, that's a lot to say about a book that I didn't care much for. I'm not trying to warn you off of it, but I do believe that there's probably other books of Mariah Edgeworth to start with, and this is definitely not the one. And you know how I've probably said, if you've watched this channel long enough, how with Jane Austen, okay, some of her juvenilia I'm not that crazy about, but as far as her published 6 novels, and I guess I would also include Lady Susan in that too. So of her 7 completed books, I don't feel like really any of them are badly told, story written, anything. Even my least favorite is still really good, and one of my favorite books still. Like, I'm almost a little bit too much of the Jane Austen could do no wrong, but I'm seeing that there's probably a lot of writers at this time, and let's face it, any other time, that I just can't wrap myself around that and say, well, yeah, it's just not going to be. It's not going to be a completely, even if the next book I read by this writer is amazing, it's just, she's not going to be complete in my eyes. But maybe I'm being too judgmental. I'll get back to you when I've read another book of The Absentee, probably. Anyway, it's a little bit long-winded. Now, speaking of Jane Austen, last July, during Jane Austen July, I started this book, and I figured this is a good time to finish it. I got about halfway through. A lot of times when I don't finish a book, it's not because it's bad, it's because I just have so many books that I'm reading. But I'm glad that I finished this book, because it was in my currently reading, and it just was hanging, and I love finishing one of the currently reading books, especially when I mean to finish it, and that is The Regency Years by Robert Morrison. I actually found this book. When did I find it? I do not remember. I feel like it was toward the end of 2019. I could be completely wrong about this. I don't know, because I remember going there and getting this book and another book, and I feel like it was before COVID, but maybe I'm just getting everything mixed up. But I remember thinking I would read it during Jane Austen July, and I did, but I didn't finish it. So The Regency Years. But when I mentioned I bought it, I'm only saying it because I like to mention this bookshop when I can, because I don't go as often as I'd like. But then again, I shouldn't be going to too many bookshops. Really, I shouldn't right now. I have too many books right now. But it's called West Sider Books, and West Sider, I think. I don't think it's West Side Books. West Sider. Goodness sakes. blanking out. Anyway, I'm a little sleepy, but it's my excuse because it's sleepy time. But it's a great little narrow bookshop in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Sometimes I've had, well, not every time, but I had a little bit of a tradition for a while. Whenever I'd get out of my office early, I would take a walk through Central Park and go out by the West Side, and go to either this bookshop or the Shakespeare Company that's there, no relation to the Paris one, or both, or the Barnes and Noble that's there. But either way, go to a bookshop. And I like this one because it has a cat, which, you know, I love. And it's narrow, and it's a little bit, for me, claustrophobic when it's narrow like that because people, you know, but it's really cool. So I bought a number of books from there over the past few years, and I think this is the first one I actually finished. So I feel very happy about that. I know that is not anything really about the book itself. This book, I would say, is just a good book if you just want to know about this time period. It's not a, oh my goodness, this book is so amazing, I couldn't put it down kind of book, but it is a good history book. It says exactly what it says here. During which Jane Austen writes, Napoleon fights, Byron makes love, and Britain becomes modern. So it talks about the writers of this time a lot, which is great because that really goes actually a lot with the Regency, the poets of that time, the novelists of this time, and of course the theater of the time, which I find interesting too. Napoleon and other wars. I didn't realize the War of 1812 was going to be expounded on a bit here, because I've surprisingly not read a lot about that particular war, that time period in America. Not as much as I would have liked, so that was interesting. A little bit about Canada too. I think this writer might be Canadian, I think. And Britain becomes modern. It does talk about how this time period sort of brought England, you know, it brings it through, well, it's like past the Industrial Revolution, but carrying on, getting into the time of the Luddites, getting into all the social upheavals, and some things were kind of moved forward, and then some things were knocked back even during the Victorian era that was to follow. But the only bit that I wasn't necessarily that into, and it's just because it doesn't interest me, is just there was a whole chapter about, like, you know, the romantic exploits of a number of people. For me, it's like I've read a lot about that already, of that time period, and it's surprisingly a lot. And I just kind of got through that pretty quickly. It's nothing against the writer, it's just that all of that, it was just so uneven, so not interesting to me. Like, this is also considered like the romantic period with poetry and everything, and my version of romance to me is not always the same, you know, considering the relationships that people had, and not so great. I also liked reading about the painters of this time, because I love that. Also gets into the year 1816, where there was like no summer because of you know, a disaster that led to there being no summer. It was like a most amazing way how some different part of the planet can affect a whole ecosystem almost. You know, that's not as scientific as I'd like it to sound, but I'm finally actually drinking my tea. It's not that great, but that's okay. But it's always interesting, and I know it's been talked about so many times, probably on BookTube and beyond, but just because it affected what people did, but also the whole time when a number of writers got together and decided to sort of challenge each other to write ghost stories, and that led to, most importantly, in my opinion, the creation of Frankenstein. But like, I love that. I love how certain things that you wouldn't think would affect one thing makes a major difference in even if it's just in the world of literature, but it's still a big deal. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling. This is kind of rambly today, but I would say I don't know if there's probably better books about the Regency out there, but I do say this is not a bad one to get a hold of if you want a good coverage of that time period, and you know, some of the great things that happened during a time, and some of the very kind of shameful things that happened during a time, in my opinion, and probably in a lot of other people's opinions. You know, let's not forget that a lot of people were making their fortunes off the backs of people's hard work of people who had no choice, you know, and so, and not just, you know, via slavery in the Americas, which was definitely one of the main ones, but also in other parts of the planet. And so anytime you see progress, you also have to think, at what cost, you know? So, but yeah, but I did enjoy reading that book. Freddy, no. Freddy thinks it's time to be fed, and it's not. Freddy. So he doesn't come on camera very often, but he makes his presence known. Okay, so the 2 library books that I finished during this time, because it's important, Library Love Readathon, and I thought the first one I'm going to get into maybe more another time, because it's a mystery, and I don't have the hat near me, and I'm going to discuss that not publicly, but on a separate Zoom discussion, so I want to keep my thoughts for that time period, but it's the first of a series, so that's good. I love starting new series, and that is Murphy's Law by Rhys Bowen. Good Lord, I cannot pronounce that name. Rhys Bowen, I hope. Anyway, a great writer, that's all I could say. I really enjoyed this book. It was a bit of a historical mystery, and it was around turn of the century, the previous century, in New York. And I do love a good book about New York in any time period. A lot about the Irish immigrants and the Irish society, really, in America, but especially in New York, and just their contributions, and so some of the power that they had that they did not have in Ireland. So that made me more curious again to read up on that aspect of New York history. So this is what I love. Some of these books are novels that, whether I like them or not, I like this one obviously a lot more than I like Castle Rackrent, but it spurs on curiosity for history. And I read a lot of history, but sometimes I haven't read about a time period in a while, and I realize it's time to like look that up a little bit and maybe find a really good history book about that period. And I have a number of decent books about the history of New York, and maybe it's time to read that again. So Murphy's Law is the first one about Molly Murphy, who leaves Ireland rather quickly and finds her way to New York and has to deal with a bunch of different complications, but someone basically on Ellis Island, which is where the immigrants were, I don't think anymore, were received when they were taking ships to America. And when I say immigrants, I don't mean the very rich ones. I mean the average, everyday person who was coming to New York to, I don't know, make a better life, or, you know, to meet up with relatives in America. And that's where they would go to see if they were okay to let into the country, you know, in terms of health even. Like sometimes they had to take different tests, and even if you had pink eye, you might be in trouble. But so someone is found dead, and she had been seen having an argument with that person on the voyage over. So now she takes it upon herself to start to investigate, along with someone else that she's sort of working with, but not quite. And I don't want to say any more about it right now, because like I said, I want to talk about it maybe another time. Maybe, we'll see. But I thought it was fantastic, and I can't wait for the next book. But because I'm not going to get into much detail about it, I will just talk about the different prompts and which ones I thought were met by reading this book. Kate Howe had read a book with a beautiful cover. I think this is quite beautiful. I think it's pretty. I like the hat. I like the kind of like the blurred Statue of Liberty. Is that whole feeling of just starting something. And, you know, Tiffany had involved travel / journey, which obviously it did, because this was a whole ship's worth of a journey from Ireland to, I think it was from Ireland to, was it Belfast or England? I can't remember now. Maybe Liverpool to America, and that is quite a journey, and it was steerage. So, you know, anyone who enjoyed Titanic, you know, can sort of visualize a little bit. My own prompts, well, basically all of them, but try something new was the main one, because it's a new series for me and a new writer. I don't think I've ever read maybe I would know how to pronounce her name better if I had read more of her books. Yeah, I've got some issues with my pronunciation lately. Chelsea had book cover with a woman in period costume with her back turned. Because as you may or may not realize, there are so many historical novels or historical mysteries that have the same exact, it may be a different outfit, it may be a different, you know, location, but it's always the back of some woman. I don't know who started that, but it just is so common. And that, well, I mean, you can see a little bit of her face here. At least her face is slightly turned to the camera, as it were. But still, it does kind of fulfill that prompt. So the other library book that I finished was very good, and it was All the Lonely People by Mike Gale. And before I get into what I thought about it, I will say, for me, again, my prompt, something new. And it was new because it was a new writer. And it was relatively new also in release. I think it came out in 2021. And I also wrote something sweet because it was, in a lot of ways, very sweet. Like, some of the relationships in here and some of the conversations were really sweet. Stephanie had a cat or dog on the cover. And again, you see the cat right on the left. Very cute. And the cat is featured in this story quite a lot. And Tiffany had set in a different country than yours. This is set in primarily London, England. A couple of scenes in Jamaica and lots of mentions of Australia. But all of these are different countries than my own. Although, besides Australia, I have actually been to Jamaica. And I have been to, I guess there was a journey in this one as well. Yeah. I've been to Jamaica. I've been to London, and I've been, obviously, yeah. So, yeah, makes me feel well traveled. I'm really not. But anyway, this is about a man named Hubert Bird. Hubert, right? Not Hubert. See that how I forget names so quickly? But I was right. Hubert Bird. He is originally from Jamaica, the island of Jamaica, and he came over to England in, I think it was 1958. It was definitely the late 50s when he was a young man. And so the story begins in modern day London. He is now a widower, and he's in a slight predicament. He keeps in touch with his daughter, who's living in Australia, who is basically concerned about him having a life. So he concocts an entire social life of his own. He has a few names that he makes up of different senior citizens that he's become friends with, that support him, that were with him in the hospital, that sort of thing. And he just keeps a notebook and with all these little different scenarios and different stories that he can relate to his daughter. But basically, he doesn't really have a social life. He just keeps himself. He's not necessarily, I don't think, grumpy. He just keeps himself and his cat. And he's lost contact with his friends from the past. And suddenly he gets word that his daughter is going to be visiting him. So he's like, I gotta make some friends. You know? I gotta have something to show for all that I've been saying. So this is sort of how he starts to meet people. Maybe not who he intended to meet, but he ends up having people in his life, and how they all realize that, you know, how many people in their area themselves are just alone, all the lonely people, like the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby. But which was very touching as an idea already, but then it keeps going back to his past, for like when he first, you know, moved to England from Jamaica, and then when he meets his wife, and, you know, his family, and how he had to deal with racism and all, you know, and difficulties because his wife was white, and so there was some, you know, prejudice as a result of that, and how he just came through life. And pretty decent guy, actually, and it just keeps going back and forth from the past till now. And it was beautifully written, and I gave it, I think, 4.5 stars in my head. You know, in Goodreads I give it 5 stars, but in my opinion it's 4.5. It was very close to being 5 stars. There was just like one or two things I thought were slightly inconsistent, but not terribly. But I thought it was an amazing book. But I will say, and I don't want to give away a lot, but there were certain twists that I did not expect. So expect the unexpected, I guess. I did tear up a couple of times, especially once when I was on the subway, which I love tearing up on the subway. And I don't know, you know how you like to compare? Well, I like to compare books and say, if you like this, you like this. Well, it had some similarities to, let's see if I can remember the names, The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, I think that was the name of it, that I read a number of years ago. And it also, there were bits of it that reminded me of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I believe I read that a couple of years ago as well. And another unpronounceable name for me, A Man Called Ova. Is that how you say it? By, I think it was Frederick Backman. Anyway, I'm batting 1,000 today. But a little bit of, if you like those books, you might like this book. But it was its own book as well, and just beautiful. And I think it just gave me a lesson of no man is an island. Always keep people in your life, and don't live in the past, but also don't let go of the people in your past. If they're, don't let go of people that are your friends, that are real people in your life, Okay, so this video is running a bit long. So I'm just gonna briefly talk about 2 books that I'm currently reading, and the first one is Mary Shelley, The Last Man. It's kind of slow going for me, but I do like the prose. It's a library book, so it's still part of the Library Love Readathon. I don't know if I'm going to finish it by the 19th, but that's okay. And then Agnes Gray by Anne Bronte, which is a reread. I read it, on a broken record, I read it about 20 years ago. But I think more like 2003 or early 2004, so close enough. And I don't remember everything about it, but there are bits that are coming back to me. It's a actually pretty quick read so far, but I did try to, in this case, I wanted to try doing an audiobook. So I checked an audiobook out from my public library because I thought that would go with Library Love Readathon. Finally do something that I almost never do with audiobooks. And you know what? I started it and I just couldn't I still have very little patience for audiobooks. I can't sit still and just listen to it, and I don't really have anything right now that I do with my hands that would make an audiobook worthwhile. I should take up something. I do have coloring books, but I just haven't been going through a coloring book phase, so. And I don't drive and I don't use audiobooks when I'm out and about, just because I like to be able to hear what's going on. So it was only a few lines and I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to read the book, the physical book. And that's what I'm doing. So this is not putting down audiobooks for other people. It's just for me. So far, it's just not happening. So that's just an update. And that's where I am right now. I think so far I've had a pretty enjoyable reading month, but I am struggling with a few things, and I think that's okay. And so, yeah, let me know how your month is going. Are you participating in these events, and are you enjoying it? I hope so. So for now, this is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.